What's up? I'm Jacob Blitzo, your Elixir mentor. Today we will start creating the form used to create our gist. If we look at our designs here, our goal will be to create the description and file name inputs, followed by the text area and create button. So let's go ahead and jump right in and open up our project and get this going. Let's expand the lib directory, the Elixir gist web directory, the live directory, and then we're going to open up our create gist live.html.HEEx file. I was playing around with this project and I realized that we don't need to assign our flash attribute in the state a second time, since we already did that in the app.heex.html file. We were getting errors about multiple IDs being used for the same thing. So we're going to just remove that. And then let's first add at the end of instantly share Elixir code notes and snippets a period, because I forgot to add that. And now underneath our gradient banner, we want to add our form here. And we're going to use a form function that is included with LiveView. Instead of the standard like normal HTML form, we're going to use .form, which is a special class or function that basically allows us to implement data from our state a little easier in LiveView. And we'll get into that in a second. So if we go ahead and just create the opening and closing tags here, you'll notice I get a warning, and it says that it requires an attribute for. And what that means is we basically have to set an attribute in our assigns, which is held in our state, in our socket, so it knows what the form is being used for. So to have access to the form data, we need to initialize its state in our mount function. So let's open up our LiveView.ex file, the create gist live.ex. And before we jump down into the mount function, we need to alias in our gists context file and our gist schema. So we just need to do elixir gist dot, and then we can alias them on one line. We'll just do gists here for our context, and then we'll have to do gists.gist for our schema. Then we're good there. And now let's move down into our mount function, our mount callback. And we need to use assign, which takes 3 parameters, and it's part of the Phoenix LiveView library to update the socket's state. So we're going to just make a variable that is socket. So we're just going to update the socket being passed into mount with our form attribute that we're going to use in our form in the HTML. And to do that, we can just do assign. And then this takes 3 parameters, but I'm going to return down so it's easier to read. And we just need to pass in our socket. This would take a list of whatever attributes that we want to add. And for now, we're just doing our form attribute. And you could call this whatever you want. It's just, we're calling it form because it's going along with our gist form. So if you needed to call it something else, you can do that. But for this sake, our attribute name is just going to be called form. And then we need to use a function called to_form. And this takes a change set and converts it into the form data. And we need it to be form data. The change set that we need is our gists change set. And there's a function I want to just show you guys. If we open up our Elixir gist directory and go into our gists context file, and we scroll down towards the bottom, we see we have a change gist. And all this does is it returns a change set. And we're going to pass in an empty gist struct, and then it will return basically a valid change set with an empty gist struct for us. And that'll be how we initialize the form, and it'll just be all blank values. So going back to our mount function in here, now we just call gists.changeGist, and then we pass in an empty gist struct. And we do that by doing a percentage, the name of the schema, opening and closing braces. And now this is all we need to do. This creates the new form based on a new empty gist struct. And then we still return the tuple with the OK atom and now the updated socket. This is all we'll do in our live.ex file in this video, but we'll be coming back in the next one and using event listeners that will be used to validate form data and persist it to the database. So jumping back to our create gist live.html.HEEx file, we can now add our assigns attribute form in the opening tag like this. So inside form, we can do for equals, and then since this is HTML, we have to use curly braces, and then at form. So this directly grabs all of our attributes out of the assigns. And we are using curly braces instead of the HEEx syntax because the HEEx syntax is for inline Elixir when we're not in HTML. And now I'm going to just return down the closing tag to form here. We want to create an outer div for all our inputs and the create button. So let's start with div, whoops, like that. We can go ahead and add some CSS classes here. We want to do a justify, center. We want to do padding on the X of 28 units. And then we want to have the width be full width of the div container. And then we want to space up on the Y by 4 units as well. And then we're going to want some margin on the bottom of 10. We want everything to be centered on the screen. So, and then we add some padding on the X-axis. We want it to span the full width of the form div, added some space on the Y-axis, and then some margins on the bottom. The first input we need is our description field. We will call the input function the same way we did form. So we're going to do input, and then an input is a self-closing tag. So we just need to do that at the end there. And now an input takes a field, and the field is the attribute we're grabbing from form. So in curly braces, we want to be inside curly braces. We need to do at form, and then we do square brackets. And to get the description out of our form, we do a colon, so an atom for description. I had to spell it right. Description. Okay, so this will set the value description to our form attribute when have any action. So when we're validating our data or creating a gist struct to persist to our database. That's how we set it to description. And then we want to have a placeholder. And our placeholder is just what our input is going to say before we type anything. And we want that to say gist description ... All right. And then we also want to turn autocomplete off. Perfect. If we don't set the type, by default, it is text. So since we didn't set the type, this input is a text type input. Now we're going to create an empty div to block together our file name input and our code text area. So we just need an empty div. And now inside of this, we want to create the gray header that our file name input sits inside. So if you don't remember, we got to create this gray. So it has top rounded corners and then not rounded bottom corners, okay? So let's add some, so we need our gray div, and then our gray rectangle, or div I should say, class, we need to make it a flex box. And then we're going to add a padding of 2, And we want the items to be center, and we want the background color to be our EM dark default, which is our like medium gray color. And then we want to have our rounded top corners with the medium radius bend. All right. And then we also want a border. Let's go ahead and spin up our project and ensure everything looks good before continuing. So let's first make sure our Postgres container is running. So let's open up Docker. Mine is not, so I'm going to run it. And now we're good. And now we have to open up our terminal and CD into our project. Mine is in Documents, Develop, Elixir Mentor, and then Elixir Gist. And then mix space phx.server will spin up our project. We just need to pull open our local host here. Local host 4000. And we just have to log in. Remember, ignore the ugliness of this because we'll clean up this CSS later. And Elixir Mentor is my password. And we're in. All right, so our input needs a little love. Let's, because it's white and we want it to be black and skinnier, right? And then our gray little rectangle looks good because that'll actually expand taller once we put the file name input in there. We need to add a white border around our gist description, make the background black, and let's go ahead and take care of that. If we expand assets, expand CSS, and go into our app.css file, we can just go in wherever we want, and we're going to actually write a CSS function that will overwrite all inputs that are of type text, okay? So what we do is we do form, input, and then in square brackets, we say type equals, and then in quotation marks, we say text. And then we do our opening curly braces. And now we can do what we're used to doing. So the add apply. And now we want to set our background color. So background.em dark-dark. So we want it to be our black color. And then we want our font to be our brand font that we set. And we want our font to be regular, not bold. And then we want our text to be white. And then we also want our text to be extra small. And then we want a border, and our border color needs to be white. All right. And while we're here, let's add a lavender border when the input is in focus or selected, okay? So same thing, we're going to do form, input, in square brackets, type equals, and this is for our type text. And now next to this, we do our colon, focus. You should recognize a lot of this. We've done this a lot. And now we can do our add apply, and we want our focus outline to be none. And then we want our focus focus colon border. And we want this to be our lavender. So EM lavender, and this can just be the medium default lavender, not dark. So lavender. And then we also want our focus ring to be 0. So we're only making the border change color when this is in focus. So save that. Okay, now we can pull up Firefox again, and look at that. That looks so much better. And now when it's selected, it's that lavender color, and our border is white when it's not selected. So now we're ready to add our name input. We're going to put the input inside a div with its width set to 300 pixels. And then we'll add some margins to the bottom so we can center the input a little bit. And the only reason I know all these things is because I built this project and just tweaked it until it looked good. So inside this gray container or gray div block, this is where we want another div, and our class equals, we want to set the width equal to 300 pixels here. And then we want to add some bottom padding of just 2 units. And what this is going to do is just kind of, our input is slightly off center to the bottom, and this is just pushing it up a little bit to be center. And the 300 width will allow, like, our input by default will fill whatever div it is inside of. So it's going to be shorter, and this is how we're controlling that, okay? So now we want to just create our input just like we did above for description. And it's a self-closing tag. And our field is name for this one. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. We need to do inside 2 curly braces. We need to get our form and then opening square brackets. And now we do the atom for our key value, and that is name. All right. And so now we need our placeholder, and our placeholder is going to be file name including extension ... All right. And then we also want to have autocomplete off because we don't want to be filling anything in for these things. Okay, now save it and let's pull up Firefox, and that's looking pretty good. And as you can see, since we already set up the input type text with our CSS classes, it is already formatted. So that's really cool. Now, outside of the gray header div, we need to add our text area. Now, let's see. So outside of the gray div, so right here underneath here, we are going to use textarea, and it's a function that's included with phoenix.html.form, and we need to import this in our LiveView so we can use it. So let's quick head back over to our create gist our live.ex file, and just right under our use Elixir Gist Web LiveView, we're going to import phoenix.html, HTML is all capital, and then .form. And that's going to give us access to the form, the text area function in our HEEx file. And now we need to use the HEEx syntax around it, and that is the less than percentage equal sign, like that. And so since this is not in an HTML tag, we need to, now we can write native Elixir code in here. And text area is a function. So we're going to say text area and then opening and closing parentheses. And then the first argument is form, comma, and then the field name that this text area is going to be associated with. And in our schema, it is, so it's an atom too. It's markup underscore text. Okay. And then comma, and then we can add classes with that we need. And we'll just go ahead and set the width to full. We want it to span the full width of the div block. And then we want rounded bottom corners. So we're going to do raw and dash B for bottom, and then do the medium round. And that is good for that. And then comma space, we want to have a placeholder for this now. And that placeholder will be insert code ... All right. And then we want to turn off spell check. So do spell check. Spell check, and we're going to set this to false, and then we want to do autocomplete false as well, or off. All right, now let's take a look at our project. we'll see how it's looking. All right, so it is looking pretty good. Obviously, we have this ugly blue focus border when we click on it, and the text is way too big. The background's white. So let's create another CSS function for us. So let's jump over to our app.css file. Underneath our form input, we're going to just create a new class for textarea. So we're going to do .textarea, and then opening curly and closing curly braces, and then add apply. And we're going to set the background color. So background is our EM dark. Okay. And then our font is our brand font. And our font is regular, not bold. And then we want our text to be white. And we want our text size to be extra small. We need a border, and we want that border to be white. And we're going to hard code the height of this box. So we're going to do H, and then in square brackets, we're going to just do 300 pixels tall, not 30, 300 px. All right, so that's that. And then we want to say resize none. And the reason we're doing resize none is we want it to stay 300 pixels and be scrollable. All right, and then underneath that, so do the semicolon at the end of that. That's the last of our CSS applies. We need to turn off the top border. So we can do border dash top colon, and then we're just going to say none, because we already have the border on the gray box going all the way around, and we don't need the border on the top of ours. So let's save this, and let's just add text area now in our HEEx. So in our class, we can just say text area right there. And now if we save it and go back to Firefox, there we go. We still have that ugly highlight too, so we need to fix that. The text is looking good. It's white, the background's black, and our corners are rounded only on the bottom. I would say that's looking really good. Okay, let's go back to our app.css, and we want to just do the hover state. So we're going to do .textarea colon focus, not hover, sorry. Focus, and then opening and closing curly braces, and we're going to do add apply. And for this, we don't want it to highlight at all, because I think it kind of looks bad when it's a big box in focus, like here. I just don't think there's a reason for that, especially since you're probably going to be copy and pasting code. So we're just going to turn it off so it just stays a white border. So we're going to do focus colon outline none, and then focus border dash white. So we're just going to make the focus border the same color. You won't be able to tell. And then focus ring will be 0. And then let's save it and go back. And now you can see when we're in focus, it's still just a white background. And then we can type as much code as we want. That's pretty cool. We are almost done with the heavy lifting. We need to add our button. So let's ensure we are outside of the empty div block. So go back to our HEEx file, and we have this empty div block. So we have to go underneath this one, because that empty div is keeping our name input and our markup code text area together. And so now we're going to create another div right here. So div, and this is going to have some CSS classes. We want it to be a flex box as well. And then we also want to say justify end. And what that does is it will ensure everything in this div will be pushed over to the right side. And that's where we want our button. So inside this div, we need to call our form button function, which is .button, like that. And then we need to do our closing tag for the button, like that. And then in between these two tags, we're going to say create gist, and that will be the text in our button. So let's save that, and let's take a look at our project now. And look at that. Our button's over here. It's exactly where we want it. It does need to be, if we pull up our designs, it needs to be purple with a white border and black text. So let's jump over to our app.css file again, and let's create the CSS for this button. We'll call it create button, and opening curly brace, closing curly brace, and then add apply. And now we want the background to be our purple, our default purple, so the middle one. And then we want we want a border, and then we want the border to be white. And then we want our font to be our brand font, and our font to be regular, not bold. And then our text needs to be black, and our text base, which is just like 16 pixels, okay? So that'll make it a little bigger than the small. So save that, and let's look at Firefox. Oh, we have to add create button. I always forget to do that. So we have our button, and now inside here, we just need to add our CSS class, and then do create underscore button, save it, and go back to Firefox. And there we go. Now we have create gist, but it's purple. I don't like that. And well, I mean, I do like that. I don't like that the hover is gray. And I also don't like gist being capital. So let's change that. And let's go back to our app CSS. Let's add the hover state that will darken the button, but not to gray. So let's go ahead and underneath, so create underscore button, and then for our hover state, opening curly and closing curly braces, and then add apply. We want our hover background to be EM purple dark, so it'll go to our dark purple. And then we want our text to be EM dark light, so it'll go to a gray. And I think that'll look really good. And then we want our border EM dark light as well. All right, let's save that and see how that looks. So scroll down. Yeah, that looks really cool. I think that looks good. This is pretty exciting. We got our create gist form built, and moving forward, we'll add input validation and persist data into our database. As always, if you need help or want to check out the solutions, check out the GitHub link in the description. Join my Discord server, Elixir Mentor, if you have questions or want to hang out and chat. That link is in the description as well. If you want to learn how to build scalable, production-ready, full-stack, and REST API solutions, hit that subscribe button now. I'm Jacob Litzo, your Elixir Mentor. See you in the next video.